let's talk about a few ways that if you do find hornworms in your tomatoes, in your garden, what you can do to control them. So first of all, some people actually prefer not to kill the hornworms because they do have an adult phase, which is the hawk moth, and that has some value as a pollinator. Once it's a moth, it's harmless to your garden, except that it could be laying more caterpillar eggs, and they can have two generations in a season. They will also overwinter in your soil, and so it's a perpetual cycle if you let too many of them live. That's a little bit of a conversation for a different day. Today we're talking about control. So the number one way to do it is actually to come out here, if you find hornworms, with a jar or a can with soapy water in it. Just be generous. There's no real recipe you need, but be generous with a good amount of dish soap in warm water mixed in, and then look for the things, pull them off, drop them in the water. They'll die instantly in there. Is that a little bit gross? Sure it is, but sometimes gardening has to be a little gross to be successful. You could also capture them alive by, again, pulling them off, collecting them in a jar or can, not with the soapy water, and they're actually a great food for a lot of poultry that we keep at home, like chickens and ducks. The ducks will go crazy over them. I used to have ducks, and we had one year when the hornworms were really bad, and we would go out and collect these things and throw them to the ducks, and they would fight over them and pull them apart. So, the ducks have to eat too, so maybe that's a nice cycle of life for it. So that is actually the number one recommendation of pretty much all experts, universities. They say just go out and hand pick them because they'll be pretty localized to the plants. They're crawling creatures. They can't travel very far. They can travel through your tomato patch, but as long as they have a food source, they don't have a need to go down the whole row. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that the moths didn't lay multiple sets of eggs and caterpillars throughout your row, so you really do need to keep an eye on the whole area, especially if you've had them in any of your tomatoes at all. So hand picking, it's completely organic. You're not applying anything to your plants. You don't need to worry about harming other pollinators or anything, and it's effective as long as you can find the worms. But the hornworms in themselves are difficult to find. You can go outside at night with a black light, and they will glow a color, kind of a whitish greenish purple, and that will help you find them and get rid of them. Other than that, yes, there are some products and organic products and controls that we can use, and the best one of those would be BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So BT is very targeted to caterpillar and worm type insects, and they will work on hornworms. It does work better when they're small, so you could do this preventatively, spray your plant. As long as they do ingest it from the plant, then that will kill them when they're small and young. Little harder to do when they're older. It just doesn't work quite as well once they're large, the size of like your finger, but still could work and still have some control. So that's your number one. If you're going to go with kind of a more aggressive approach, would be the BT. You will need to respray it if you get rains. So in other words, if you're doing it kind of as a preventative, or you suspect that you have some young infestation in there and you're trying to get ahead of it, or even if they're older and you've sprayed it, you'll have to reapply it for as long as you want that BT to be ingested. And because it is something that goes on the leaves and then the caterpillars eat it, as long as it's still there, even in its dry form, they'll eat it and they will die. It is very safe for pollinators and bees because it only works on things like caterpillars and worm-like creatures. So it doesn't really work on a bee anyway, or even adult butterflies and moths. It won't work on any of them. So it's one of the safest approaches and most targeted approaches. Neem oil, insecticidal soap, and there's some other options too that we've listed in the article. Those are also all good. They have a little bit more impact on pollinators, so you want to take your time, read your labels, and pay attention to how much and when you should be applying that to protect bees and pollinators. So, you know, as you can see, there's some good controls for them. One other that we need to mention are the parasitic wasps, which sometimes you can buy eggs and actually release them. Aphids and lacewings, not aphids, I'm sorry, ladybugs and lacewings are also good things to release in your garden early on, because they can actually get to these guys in their egg in very, very early larval stages, long before you're going to know that they're there. So they're also a good preventative measure. But if you see worms and they have these white casings kind of sticking up out of their body, those are actually hornworms that have been parasitized by the braconid wasp. They've laid their eggs on them. Those eggs are actually doing their job. They're actually pupating wasps, tiny little wasps, and all of those will hatch out into another wasp that then will help continue to control naturally without you ever doing something. And, you know, if you have enough plants, it really depends on how much you have, how much the level of damage is, how much the insect pressure is, how many hornworms you have. But you might even be able to achieve a level of control that maybe you can live with. Not to say that there won't be any caterpillar damage at all, but to say that it might not be enough for you to have to go to extraneous measures, and maybe you can let that natural cycle of parasitic wasps, insects, all kind of feed and do their thing. It is something that we need to keep in mind, that if we're killing those caterpillars that are the hosts for the parasitic wasps, we're also disrupting that life cycle. So all good things to keep in mind, good ways to deal with hornworms. They're kind of gross and a little creepy, but all in all, as garden pests go, they're one of the easier ones to deal with. So that's actually good news.